I'm James Hughes, bioethicist and resident techno-progressive.
And I'm Eisikovits, philosopher and resident Luddite.
And you're listening to Prosthetic Gods, an optimist and a grump on tech, a podcast where we explore the social, ethical, and political impacts of emerging technologies.
Good morning, Stephen. Good morning, Jay.
Good morning.
Morning.
Very excited to have Stephen Marche with us today. Stephen is a novelist and a journalist and an essayist and has written for the New York Times, New Yorker, The Atlantic, author of several novels, several nonfiction books, a lot of very, very influential essays. Stephen is joining us from the great metropolis of Toronto, right?
That's right.
In our 51st state of Canada. So
Don't even joke, buddy. I'll have to walk off the set.
Stephen has been with us before and has done some very, very cool and I'd say prophetic, really work on AI. A few years ago, published this essay that made a big splash about the college essay being dead with the introduction of Gen AI, and then a bit later, an account of Stephen. I take it your experience producing an AI novel with several AI tools, and that was called "The Future of Writing is a Lot Like Hip Hop." So I assigned that essay to my students in a philosophy of technology class. They loved it. They couldn't get enough of it. I really wished that I had brought you into that class by Zoom, but we thought it'd be cool to talk to you about. So that's the setup.
I just want to say, reviewing that essay, in light of the recent research evidence and staunch debate about cognitive offloading, about people putting too much reliance on these tools and how to find that balance in pedagogy. I think you were so prescient in saying, look, we need to understand what the new skills are at a higher level.
Yeah, I think because I came to AI so early, like because it was something that like my journey with AI was pretty accidental. And I think that had a big deal, that had a lot to do with the perspective that I came to in those essays. Like, it began with me. I mean, I don't want to go on too long because we probably have more, but just to explain to you why I came to those conclusions. I wrote an essay called "Literature is Not Data" for the LA Review of Books in 2012. There was a sort of against distance reading kind of argument. And it became pretty popular among digital humanists. It was the kind of thing that when you go to a conference, they say, we've read this article, we're ignoring it, but just so you know that we've read it. Like it was footnoted a lot in that sense. And because of that, people kept sending me things that were like, well, you're wrong about this, right? Like this part is very interesting. Half the time they were wrong, but half the time they were right. So I kind of had this pipeline of angry people sending me really interesting literary tech things. And then what also happened is that artificial intelligence was invented in my neighborhood, right? And my wife is allergic to dogs, and my daughter loves dogs. So I would take my daughter to the dog park, and a lot of the people who were involved in the early days of AI, particularly around 2015, 2016, I sort of met them there and they started telling me what they were doing. And it was also incredibly fascinating. And so, the first AI generated story I published was in Wired in 2017. And then, so that, you guys know that's like prehistory for this stuff. That's like,
Right.
May as well say the Paleozoic era of AI. And then from that, I started working with it creatively, wherever I could find a place that would let me publish it. I think I published one in the MIT Tech Review. And then I think the first story that had generation in it for the LA Review of Books in 2020. I'm pretty sure that was the first mainstream published generated story. And then I worked with Cohere, and I started to meet some engineers who were very interesting creatively, and we did some projects together. And then, of course, the novel. So I didn't see this technology. What didn't happen is that I woke up one day and saw ChatGPT. I'd seen it building. And then when ChatGPT happened, I was like, okay, well, we know what I sort of knew what it meant when it happened. And that's why it wasn't necessarily prescience when I saw this stuff. It's just that I'd been working with it longer than other people, so I knew what it could do and what it couldn't do, and that just gave me an advantage.
So if we back up for a minute, Stephen, to 2017 when you did the first AI generated or AI assisted piece, given how different the tools were then from ChatGPT, what drew you to it?
Well, I was very interested in, like, it was becoming clear even then that there were certain generation possibilities, right? That there were machines generating text and that they weren't just autofill on your phone, right? And they were extremely primitive, right? And digital humanists were doing things where they used particularly R-based programming to do literary analysis. And what they were figuring out, although again, this is incredibly crude and kind of had nothing to do with what followed, is that you could reverse engineer the process. And so you could take these analytic methods and then use them to generate. And basically, I knew a digital humanist at University of Toronto, and he knew a computer scientist who was working on this stuff. And I said, why don't, as an experiment, you build me a model? Right. And this would be sort of like Soapbox Racer version of an AI generated story. Like it was like very, very crude and involved a lot of patching and a lot of stuff. But it was before the transformer wasn't invented yet. Or actually, technically it was, but it had not come out, like I wasn't aware of it. And then, of course, when the transformer comes along, then it's, then you go from Soapbox Racer to nuclear submarine, and you're dealing with a completely different kettle of fish and, totally different problems and opportunities. And then that led to sort of different generation methods. But, like the MIT Tech Review one, I wasn't using transformer-based AI. I was using word clouds, and I was using other sort of more R-based literary analysis tools inverted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of an innovation that we did there. I mean, it turned out to be a useless innovation because the transformer came along, but we were playing around in that space and with some pretty interesting results, I think.
Has the growing power of the models and their trajectory of capability changed your opinion about how to use these tools that you expressed a couple years ago?
Well, the big one was the jump from GPT-2 to GPT-3, and then from GPT-3 to GPT 3.5. Those were mega leaps. They were enormous leaps in difference. And for what I was doing, like you could take a paragraph in, when I did the first generative work that was, I think I'm the first person to use generated text in the pages of The Atlantic or anywhere else. And all I did, and that was with GPT-3, and all I did was, end a paragraph and had it continue, right? And so that was just a completely different phenomenon than anything that had been seen before. Everything that I've seen after that, as impressive as so much of it is, that I haven't seen that size of a leap in terms of what I can use, in terms of what I can do. I mean, they say it's better at math and all this stuff, but I don't really understand those metrics the way that I understand, say, its compositional abilities, which I do feel I understand very highly. So that was the massive leap in terms of the creative potential of this stuff. I mean, it's much more refined now, but the truth is, creatively, I think the new stuff is much more restricted, right? Like, I think it's actually much less useful creatively because, when I was working with Cohere, and I mean, that's the other thing, I was working with these OpenAI models. But when I was working with Cohere, I was working with the co-CEO of Cohere. He can manipulate the algorithm for me. And that's a whole other realm of creative possibilities that essentially I think I'm the only one who has access to it. But it is, to me, that's the future of creative AI, and we're not really doing that. They're essentially making products that they expect creative people to use. Those products have some values. Often they don't have any value. And but the manipulation of the actual model is where the real creative joy can come. And I had a window into that, and it was pretty special.
Just on that, there's a paper released just this week about training models on creativity, examples of creativity, and rewarding them for coming up with creativity. And you get more creative models, no surprise. It's like the version of models we have now, maybe too STEM oriented. We need more humanistic models.
Well, I think the problem is that the gap between the humanists and the technologists is so wide that I just happen to have the good fortune to run into Nick Frost at Cohere, who is the lead singer of a band and a hugely creative person, as well as being an expert on LLMs and co-CEO of this billion-dollar company. I mean, the kind of people who I think are really going to be required to make this into the art form that it can become are your Disney-like people. Your people who can span huge differences of technological, creative, financial, audience abilities, and can manipulate and can build them all, right? And so that's those people are rare. I wish I was that guy, but I'm just not that guy, right? I'm just a writer, really.
So,
But I mean, the problem, creating a model that does originality is a very interesting idea. But of course, you need the thing about originality is you need to constantly update it, right? Like it doesn't say the concept of originality itself needs to shift. So, but that I mean, I think that's
And it's usually pretty ahistorical.
exactly, yeah. It's usually by people who haven't thought much about what the hell originality might be anyway.
Right.
yeah, yeah. So how did this idea come about to sort of produce a novel, The Death of the Author, with AI? I'm assuming for you it was kind of the continuation of this trajectory, but what motivated the publisher to do it? Why did you sort of want to commit to a bigger project along those lines?
Well, I mean, I love working with AI. I mean, if we're up to me, that'd pretty much be what I do now.
Hmm.
The thing that is very interesting to me anyway is that the actual ability to do that work is very limited. So like when I was doing this work, it was before most of this work, it was before ChatGPT. And so I could and I was publishing it in little journals. Now, I'm a professional writer. I know that I'm going to write stuff that nobody's going to read. And this is part of the creative process. This is part of the nature, especially when you're doing experimental work. That's the reality. But so I was writing short stories and little bits of essays and little prose experiments. Then, Pushkin Industries came along, and it was right in the AI mania of right after ChatGPT. They said, "Why don't you write us a novel?" I said, "Yes, please." Like I will absolutely undertake to do that for you. I knew that AI models at that point could pretty easily produce lyrical, like fanciful, poetic stuff pretty easily. The thing they really can't do, and we learned this when we were doing the models in 2017 when we were building our soapbox racer, that like the linguistic patterns and style are actually pretty easy to get a model to mimic. Its plot is very different. And getting a meaningful narrative out of a machine, a good narrative, really, I mean, to this day, it's very hard, right? And so the experiment was, let's make it like a plot-heavy book built for readability, i.e., a murder mystery thriller, right? Like, getting a machine to do that is a lot more challenging than getting it to write poems, right? Which you can just hit a button and say write a poem like this, and it will, right? So it was about giving it a box in which it was a little more of a challenge for me and for the machine to do. And so and so that's why, the article about AI's like the writing is like hip hop. We wanted it to be more like hip hop rather than like, a John Cage piece or something like that. Like we wanted it to be something that people might actually consume rather than that. And one of the interesting things is we tried to do audio. Like we wanted to do, obviously we're going to do all AI. We'll do AI audio. And we just couldn't find an AI audio at that time that you could listen to for 2 hours. You could listen to it for a minute or two, but like to have it actually read you a whole book. And so we got, Eduardo, who's like the voice of God and maybe the best voice reader in the world, to do it instead, right? What we wanted to be clear, we're going to get this to do what it can do, and we're going to see what it can't do. And the standard here is something that is actually consumable, right? That is actually something that you might want to read, right? And so that was the nature of that experiment.
I think it's Kindle that just gave all authors the right to turn on AI generated audiobooks on
Right.
their novels. So.
Well, I mean, you can do it, and like they fool you for a bit. Those have been around for a while, but I actually find them pretty annoying. Like like if it's like your only option, I guess it could work. But if you're trying to make something that, I don't know, people read things that are only the best things that they can find, right? Like there's no point in reading a book that isn't great because, people have so much to read that they don't have time to read anything that isn't great. And so I don't know why you would do that.
Yeah,
Because
Jim Dale's Harry Potter was on constantly in our household and
right.
put people to sleep. And I don't know that anyone can come up with an AI that would do everything yet.
Look, I mean, even bad actors are pretty unbearable, right? You have to the really good ones make a huge difference.
Yeah. So, Stephen, on that, let me ask you a somewhat provocative question on that same principle that you just stated. I mean, I've been reading you for a while, and forgive the flattery, I don't do it unless I mean it. I think you're a really good writer, like really, really good. And you're probably a better writer than what was, I think you'd agree with this too, that your product alone is sort of better in terms of readability than Death of the Author, even though that's an amazing work of production. So based on your own principle then of people only having time for the best, why do it?
Well, I genuinely think having AI write a novel is not what this is for. Right? Like I don't think that's going to be its creative use, because I think when you pick up a book, you want the human touch in it. And like not only that, you feel the human touch in it. And that's I don't think, I wrote another piece for The Atlantic called AI is the microwave of language, right?
Mhm.
And like microwaves are incredibly useful. But, if you're having lunch, I'm about to have lunch after this thing. I'm going to go make myself a proper grilled cheese sandwich. Like I'm going to like put butter on the sides and cheese in the middle, and I'm going to grill it and flip it. And it's going to take time, but it's going to be a proper grilled cheese sandwich. I could take two pieces of bread, put cheese in the middle, put it in the microwave, and, put French's mustard beside it and eat it like my brother did when he was a teenager. But like, on the other hand, I want to be a human being, right? So I'm going to make myself a proper grilled cheese sandwich. Now, microwaves are very useful for lots of things. In a lot of avant-garde kitchens, they use it. That's how I would think of my own work with AI. It's like add the avant-garde work with this. But, what it's going to be used for and what it's not going to be used for, I mean, that's really up in the air. And it is not going to be used for everything. It's really not going to have a use case of everything. It's going to have a use case for many things.
Surveys have shown that the tools are taking off. There's widespread adoption, especially among Gen Z. A lot of students using it for work, their homework, and people using it in the workplace. But also that if you acknowledge using it, you are trusted less, and people think less of your accomplishments.
Yeah.
One part of the argument that Nir and I are constantly having is, I think he holds to the idea of intellectual virtue that the least dependence on these things, the least use, would be the most intellectually virtuous. And I'm like, well, has to be a new concept of what intellectual virtue means in how you use. And I think that's what I really liked about your essay, is that it seemed to be expressing this idea of you're clearly a master of your own craft, right? You know the technique of your own craft, and you're trying to apply it at this higher level with these new tools. And I think that's the new kind of intellectual virtue that people haven't yet recognized as legitimate.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's sort of like the arrival of a synthesizer, right? Like in a sense, like a synthesizer, you can make, and you that's why it's like hip hop. You can make beautiful, beautiful stuff that you couldn't make before, right? And the question is, what can this technology make that couldn't be made the other way? But much the same with music. If you play the piano, like that's not wasted because there's a synthesizer, right? Like that. Like in fact, if you want to know how to manipulate art, all of the old virtues are going to apply, right? All of the old intellectual virtues are absolutely going to apply. And kids who like are writing their essays with Grammarly or whatever, that's not going to work out well for them, right? Like they need to know. It's like if you're a musician, you can always learn how to use a synthesizer afterwards. Being able to play Fur-Elise on the piano, you should know how to do that, right? Whatever you're going to do. So, I mean, I'm sort of on both of your sides. Like, I absolutely believe the old intellectual virtues haven't changed one iota. Like, not like I mean, I still like I actually, I had a very because of various complications in my early life, I had basically a 19th century linguistic education with sentence chains and like Canada, like old imperial leaders. I was given a very, very old fashioned literary education and compositional education. And that's why I can write, is that I have those antique modes. But I do find I mean, it is so exciting and it is so, it's so, there's so many possibilities. I just think we haven't figured out what those possibilities are. And what we're doing right now is we're cannibalizing old forms. Right? It's like when they started film, the first thing they did was like put plays on in movie form, and it didn't work. Right? Like they needed to figure out what a fade is, what a cut is, how you create these things. And I mean, I would love to be involved in the making of that form. The truth is, there's actually a very, very limited market for it, and very few people working in this space that can get towards that creativity. And of course, it also requires a lot of money. And that's another, I think, big gap, is that the production, much like film, like the production of this stuff is going to cost money, and it's going to require capital intensive investment to make. But I don't really think we found the form, like this is being used to write all these lousy college essays right now. That's just a phase. Like we're going to get through that. And the college essay is going to die, but it's also going to come back. Right? People are going to learn how to write because it's just too valuable a skill to not have. And AI doesn't change that at all. Not in my opinion. I mean, but there are, like, I think learning how this stuff works and what it means, of course, is essential to just being a contemporary human.
Yeah, so much there. I mean, I guess as I understand your argument in the essay that the future of writing is a lot like hip hop, is that you almost that the condition for your success in doing this is the fact that you had that classical education, is the fact that you're if you will, a connoisseur or a curator of the history of literature that, made you able to say, here is where, a Hemingway-esque kind of formulation should fit, and here is where a different writer's style would be better, and here's how I would describe this style to you. I mean, doesn't that make this a kind of sui generis, exciting, creative project that depends on the trajectory of people like you? So, because if you sort
Yes.
of fast forward something like this, right now, there can be somebody who's Stephen Marche, who's a novelist and also knows the history of writing, so that they can coax this out of a language model. But if you look, a little bit forward, then the history that will be relevant to know is just the history of these sort of hip hop like productions. So it seems like the curation thing is temporary.
Well, I mean, let me tell you a project that I'm trying to get off the ground is maybe an example of both the possibilities of AI art and also the limitations of doing it. So with Nick at Cohere, he and I worked out this way of creating prompts and then essentially stacking these prompts, and then regenerating them so that we created an infinitely generating story. Right, like if you can imagine it, it's like the same story, the same characters, the same scenes, the same dialogue, but every time you open it, it's a different telling. Right. I found this incredibly fascinating. There's nothing. This is not a novel. Right. This is a completely unique creative event. Right. It is an infinite text object. Right. Which has no precedent now because of the creative world's utter rejection of artificial intelligence. I was able to get things published before because no one took AI seriously. Now that the creative people have found out about AI, they just reject it, and like you can't take it to any of the places that were publishing me before and say run this story. They're just too afraid of it, and they have loathing for it. They have a kind of like innate. And then there's also these ethical questions that they bring up, which don't seem particularly relevant to me. But I on the other hand, it's become political in a way that was not. It has nothing to do with my creative processes, but is a fact of life. So we're really struggling to figure out how to project this, and I'm working it into what I hope will be, instead of a story, it'll be an infinite prayer for peace, like that we can then distribute through the art world, because the art world is much more open to the possibilities of creative AI than the literary world. I think, the art world is much more adventurous generally. Literary people tend to be much more conservative. That just is a pattern that's been around for millennia, really. Now, what is this object that we're talking about? Like an infinitely generating text.
Stephen, can I just stop you real quick?
Yeah.
Because that's an interesting idea that the artists are less anxious. I see a lot of anxious artists, and just the hip hop example that you referenced in your piece. Hip hop led to this historic legal determination of how much music you can use before as fair use and how much you can't. I think we're in the process of figuring that out with AI and the legal challenges to alleged copyright abuse.
Well,
what do you have feelings about the artist's claims that this has been a copyright infringement?
Well, I think it has been. I mean, artists need to be paid for their work, right? If it's going to be used in a thing, I think you can't just access work without paying for it, right? Like I think that much is very clear. I mean, I don't think it fits in the same category as copyright infringement because it's not processing the language in any way that would be human, and it's not citation in any meaningful way. However, I mean, that said, if you go to Grok or Google and type in, do you think there'll be another civil war in the United States? It will sometimes give you the opening page of my book. And I don't get paid for that. And that's not right. Right. And then you have people cutting and pasting that and putting it in their essays in political science classes and not even knowing that they're plagiarizing me. Right. So, in hip hop, it got worked out. I mean, it still gets worked out by people use the samples. If it becomes a hit, they get sued and they come to a deal. Right. Like that's how it worked out. Not a particularly sensible way. Right. That you had to, essentially people are violating copyright and then working it out afterwards. I don't think we're in the same space in that. But at least in hip hop, they got the songs out. Right. And I think with this work, there's so much, like I've been working on a bunch of very interesting creative and scholarly applications of artificial intelligence. And I've really realized that there's no welcome for them. Like you literally just can't even get them to look at them. Right. And that's a different problem than the one that hip hop faced. I hope it's temporary, but because, right now what AI is doing creatively is producing massive quantities of slop, right? That is of no value to really anyone, right? And as when that happens, like when I use the microwave of language metaphor in The Atlantic, that was because if you go to somebody's house and they microwave a meal for you for dinner, you'll be upset. Like you will feel ripped off. Right. Yeah. Like, and it's the same thing with AI. Like if you ask someone to write you something and they just use AI to do it, you'll be like, well, I guess you don't give a shit about me. Right. I guess you don't care about me. If that's what AI means for creativity and for linguistic production, it'd be a huge failure because it's such a more potent tool than that. But I have to hope that we're going to figure out, like,
well, I mean, you're already showing that it's not what it means. No, I have to say that anxiety is an extremely boring version of conservatism. I think
exactly.
that is for sure. Let me give you an analogy about this curator-author kind of distinction and see what you think. So, in the classroom setting, which you referenced, the concern from colleagues, as I wrote to you earlier, is that essay writing is a good tool for teaching critical thinking, and that people think it makes less sense to assign essays right now, and they haven't figured out an alternative for critical thinking. Now, you could say, and I'm going to play with this actually in the fall in my next class, you could say you ask people to generate a conversation with an AI model about the material, and you evaluate that both on the quality of the prompts and on the quality that the AI produced. And I think that's interesting. We'll see how that works. But there, writing and prompting, even though they both might involve critical thinking, are different skills. Similarly, in the context of the essay that you wrote, being a curator of a AI produced novel and being an author of a novel are different skills. You happen to be one of the few people who can do both. I guess my question for you is like, first of all, do you even care about the distinction or not so much? And is there one that you want to be more than the other? I mean, my sense is that if your argument is right, we're going to have a lot more curators than authors. Is that a problem?
Well, I think to become a writer, you have to be a curator of yourself. Like, for one thing, right? Like, when I set out to write the next Civil War, I'm like, I am going to write this exactly like a Cormac McCarthy book. Like, I'm literally going to have Cormac McCarthy open next to the table. And whenever I don't know how to write something, I'm just going to look over and write it. Now, because it's me, when it comes out, it doesn't look at anything at all like Cormac McCarthy. It actually looks like me, right? But that's a big part of the creative process in the first place, is understanding curation, right? Understanding style. I mean, that short story I wrote in Wired in 2017, the way we built that model was that we took my 50 favorite science fiction short stories, and then we compared them to the genre of science fiction stories that existed in the databases, and then all language. And that gave us a pattern that we could then follow, right? So, and in a sense, we were trying to automate the writing process, which is, I have all these things that I'm thinking about. I have all these styles that I'm interested in, that I love, and I want to be like. What can that be? Now, the curation process, like, when I look at the reason I did the AI prompts in Death of an Author with really intense detail, and that's why it is better than AI slop, is that I knew the lexical and syntactical structures that were necessary. I knew the questions of sentence variability and sentence variation within paragraphs. And I could give very specific commands of that sort of I'm talking granular sentence structure level. And the reason I did that is that when I looked at the artist AI, like the art of the physical art of AI that was coming out at that point, like paintings and so on, or I guess images, the ones that were good had enormous prompts. Like they had prompts that were sometimes 500 words long that went through minute, Brazilian architects I'd never heard of, random Swedish designers of the 1870s that, there's no way that anyone outside of a person with an enormous vocabulary of design could understand, right? And so similarly, I was able, because I have because I have a PhD and I've read English literature, I have a grasp of the English tradition. I had a similar sort of stylistic catalog that I could bring to bear on those sorts of things. This exact same thing happened with hip hop, where, perhaps you didn't need to play the guitar as well as you needed to play it, but you needed to know everything about popular music to even get in the door, right? And people were making trips to like remote corners of Trinidad to get like weird acetate records that they could put on their beats, right? So what matters to me about literature, what matters to me about art, is loved and controlled language. And the question is, where does AI help to create loved and controlled language? It should be used. Where human beings are necessary to create loved and controlled language, it should be used. If you're using it as an excuse to get through this next bit of the book, that's just not going to end well. Like, that's just not a path to success. Because, before AI, there was lots of filler in books, and it all sucked too. Right? Like there's it's not like AI invented the concept of filler language. Like I got an email from the bank the other day that said, "Dear Mr. Marsh, you're one of our most important customers." A human probably wrote that. Like, who cares? Like, it's there's lots of dead language out there. Lots of it. The question is, how do we make living language, and which is loved, controlled language? And I think honestly, most of that's going to come from from humans. But there is definitely a place for artificial intelligence in that journey towards loved and controlled language. I mean, I think it has to be figuring out what genre it is. That's what I think. I think it's a new artistic form. I don't think it's really going to be meaningfully used to write, novels and things like that. I just don't. I say that as someone who has, written the first AI generated novel to be reviewed in the New York Times. I just don't think that's the path that this is going to ultimately go down creatively.
So from what you said so far, you're clearly on the side of those who would say, like Jonathan Haidt, that we should be restricting some forms of technology dependency in kids and encouraging them to develop cognitive skills so that they don't become atrophied. But you're also accepting that we're going to be as adults using these tools, and we have to figure out the cognitive skills to use them in the creative ways with these cognitive skills that we develop. But what's the transition? Is it like when should we start teaching kids how to do this in high school? I mean, is it inevitable that high schoolers are going to use these things anyway?
I mean, I think it'll be, well, high schoolers, I mean, like they all use it. They use it for different ways. I mean, I sort of think it's like math, right? In the sense that there's like basic math that you don't use a calculator for, and you only should use a calculator when you need it. Right? Like when you actually need to use it. On the other hand, it's not like because the calculator exists, math stopped existing, or like basic mathematics stopped existing. Right? Like it's not like you can plug in an algebra problem into I mean, I do think the metrics we have for figuring out how people are successful as writers are pretty subjective. Right? I mean, I'm old enough to remember that when I was a kid, you could not get an A unless your spelling was perfect. And, there were a lot of people who either had, mild dyslexia or just weren't good spellers that were considered bad writers because they didn't spell well. That went away with the spell check. But that doesn't mean that the process died, right? Like it just meant that or that you didn't need to learn spelling. You did need to learn spelling. It's just that spelling was no longer the determinant of what constituted excellent work. And I think something I think very organic is going to happen, very natural is going to happen, which is that writing formulaically, which, that's the whole basis of my career, is that I can write a 1,000-word essay that is exactly correct, right? In all of the structures and all of the, leads to a thesis statement, like what I was taught in grade 7. I mean, I basically don't do a lot different than that to this day, right? Like those basic structures that will become less valuable. Because it can be automatically generated. But what only you can bring, what only your perspective, your voice, your insight, your peculiarities, essentially, they'll become much more valuable because they can't be generated. Right. And I think that's, my son said to me very early when we were doing this, because he was in high school at the time, he was like, we've been taught how to write like machines, and now we have to teach people how to write like human beings. And I actually think that's the way I look at it. Like it's just going to be organic. Like it's just going to be less like when you get, when you used to get like letters of admissions from students, and it used to be evidence like, oh, they can follow a pattern. They can fit into this code. That's meaningless now, right? Because they just go to them like it's not evidence of anything. It's just evidence they can click a button. Why wouldn't they? It's a formula. But particular insight, particular vision, particular being able to make people feel things with words, those are gonna be valued even more, I think.
I mean, I guess one question that sort of underlies your essay and what you've been saying is like, what kind of tool do you think AI is? Because so you've used the sort of the calculator analogy, and in the essay you've used the thesaurus analogy. And
Yeah.
those are sort of very, and you said correctly, some people, everyone has a thesaurus, some people still produce better results than others. So the calculator and the thesaurus are like the sort of classical tools that are subject to the will of a user, where there's a hierarchical relationship between the user and the tool. This is my tool, I get it to do what I want. So that's one kind of tool. But then, on the other end of the scale is a technology like nuclear weapons, right? Which, by
Yeah.
the way, the AI people love to make,
Yeah.
references to,
Well, it makes them
which
feel
is
like Oppenheimer. Like,
exactly, exactly.
it
That's
makes
my
them
sense too.
think they're John von Neumann, right? Like they
Right.
think they're, but which they're
Right.
not. But anyway,
Right, exactly. But those kind of tools, those are the sort of small category of qualitatively different tools, which there isn't this hierarchical relationship between the
yeah.
user and the tool. And that's the tool that sort of comes back and changes the user's self-perception and the way they see the world and the possibilities of the world. And I guess I go back and forth, if I'm being very honest, in how I see AI between those two categories. Is it a calculator? Or not so much is it a nuclear weapon, but is it one of those sort of qualitatively different few tools in the history of the technology that completely change the way you perceive yourself and your possibilities? Could I ask you, like, where you are on that continuum?
Well, I'm not sure if this will be a satisfying answer, but I mean, I think it is truly a world-changing tool, but possibly not in the way that any technology has ever been before. I mean, because at the core of it is this fundamental mystery, right? Like, and partly I think, obviously I'm not an engineer, and obviously I'm not there are many things that I'm not competent to speak of, and I want to be careful about, that old line by Nietzsche, which is like, just because you can't go into the deep waters, don't think they're not there. But I've been with a lot of, I interviewed everyone who was involved in the invention of the transformer. When the people at Google were still talking to, still giving interviews, like I talked to the people who built 500 billion parameter models, that the first ones that did crazy things with learning math through language, and all these intellectual freaks, really, like super brain people that are a million miles above me, in a lot of ways. And I would ask them, like, how does this work? And none of them knew, right? Like absolutely none. And I'm talking like your no Shazirs of the world, like you're really, really extreme. The guys who made it, right? The guys who made the transformer. Like, there is a really fundamentally mysterious aspect to this technology that I think people ignore at their peril. I think, like the fact that the Chinese back engineered an AI for $6 million that the US government's about to put $500 billion into, that should tell you, like, and no one can explain how, like, and no one can actually tell you how. That should be a bit of a warning to everyone who is building, like, people are building castles in the clouds on this stuff when we don't really know what it is. It's not something that you can understand the way you can understand the internet, or the way you can understand social media, or the way that you can understand the railroad, right? Like, there is something at the core of it. Now, I've had all these people explain that, to be clear about my own limitations here. Like, I've had all these brilliant minds explain the transformer and how it works to me in depth. And I would say that I understand maybe 15% of it. Like maybe. And that 15% probably quite partially. It's the attention mechanism and how it works. I mean, I've had 10 hours of instruction from the people who used it to create all this stuff. I don't really get it, right? So there are limitations of my own, but on the other hand, when I talk to these very brilliant, some of these people are just geniuses. There's not another word for it. They also don't know why or how it does what it does, and these attempts to, like, fill in the black box, and these attempts to understand the mechanisms of it, they always come up very short. That to me, if you're asking me what the potential of it is, that's what's really exciting. Right? Like,
Mhm.
that's the source of the excitement, and it's also probably the limitation of its power, right? Like, that's why, Chevy who spent $20 billion trying to get AI to just quit because they couldn't see a path. They can't. It's not like you throw more money at it. It's not like you throw $100 billion more at it. You'll know what you're getting. You don't, right? And so that fundamental mystery. That's why it's so transformative, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not fathomable. I mean,
Right.
when I talk to like the scientists who do it, like Jacob Ushkai, very, very brilliant man, who's doing all kinds of amazing medical work with AI. Like when I asked him what his worries were about, it wasn't AGI, it wasn't any of this stuff. He's like, we're not going to do science anymore because we will have answers to questions without understanding how the answers came about. This is very interesting. This is a very profound moment in the history of cognition, right? That we
Yeah.
would be able to get answers to questions that we can ask without understanding how we got to those answers. What does that actually do for what we consider our, the comprehension of the world, right?
Yeah.
So those are the things that I find, but that's also the big opportunity here, right? Like it's exactly doing things that human beings can't think through that is going to be what AI is used for, and it's going to make
Right.
why it is revolutionary and why it is going to produce these effects, which I'm not doubting, even though this is
Yeah.
right.
I'm totally on board with that, and I like that a lot. I guess my only comment is that if the sort of mystery of it and the slight black box nature of it is part of what makes this such an attractive thing to engage with, that, at least to me, that suggests it's not so much a tool as it is almost a conversation with some kind of alien entity. For example, what you describe in your essay about how you could, with a series of adjectives, get it to emulate Chandler. And all those adjectives like that you used in the essay, driving, electric, forceful, active, prose, right? Those are themselves metaphors.
Yes.
And yet it was good at it on the one hand, which is kind of remarkable. Like that blew my mind. But it
The
couldn't
first
get
time that
narrative.
Look, even in 2017, when we were dealing with the soapbox racers, the fact
Yeah,
that the machines could understand what driving prose meant was
right.
already crazy,
Yeah,
right? Like that was
yeah,
already and could produce examples of it. I mean,
yeah,
try doing that with a student,
exactly.
like write muscular prose. It can do it, right? Like that's the
For me, that
excitement.
movie, right, exactly. But
Yeah.
I guess all I'm saying is for me, that and the point that you just made so beautifully a moment ago about the mystery of it moves it out of the category of calculators and thesauruses. Because what makes those tools is the fact that they can be completely reverse engineered.
One of the things that might be categorically different at this point is job displacement. And this week, Dario Amodei released an unusually blunt statement about job displacement. Steve Bannon, the far right authoritarian, sometimes advisor to the Trump administration, he's predicting that widespread job loss in the next couple of years is going to be the principal issue in American politics and determine 2028 and ongoing. And it could be that this is throughout the industrialized world that we see this effect. You wrote just most recently The Next Civil War, and I just wondered, do you see a connection between AI and social dislocation that could lead to civil war or civil conflict? And secondly, do you think you saw more, I think, would have imagined more civil discord than we've currently experienced under the Trump administration. So was that a surprise?
Let me answer all of these questions in order because they are actually related. Like I think near the mystery of this, it is not like a thesaurus. It's not like a regular tool. But if you looked at a camera, like what a camera can do, which is fundamentally alter the relationship that human beings have to time, right? It's something closer to that, right? Where it is both an engine of dreams, and also it is something that you being in contact with mystery is a huge part of the artistic process, right? Like I think that's been true for hundreds of years. So the question is an oracle a tool? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Right? And I think accessing that mysterious core to me is the exciting artistic possibility. It's also the hardest thing to do because what we're actually doing with it is making a bunch of slop that nobody cares about and is like degrading human beings. Now, this actually matters when you come to these questions of job losses and so on, right? And like the erasure of these these essentially starting jobs. Now, I don't do tech prophecy because I don't think I mean, we know Amara's law, like people tend to overrate technology in the short term and underrate its effects in the long term. I think that's completely accurate. And I think AI is a prime example of that. Whether the job displacements that are happening because of that, or because the president of the United States has lost his goddamn mind and is imposing a new tax order on the whole world that doesn't make any sense. Who can tell, right? Like I actually think, if you're using these companies are like use AI first. I mean, they're going to come up against a really hard lesson, which is that AI is a totally mysterious, unreliable employee. Like it is as someone who used it pretty carefully, like you don't want to be basing your decisions on what ChatGPT tells you. If you're doing that, you're gonna drive into a swamp. There's I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting about AI is that it's dreamy, right? And how useful is a dreamy employee? I mean, if it's dreamy, it might be useful, but I just don't think
they hallucinate more than more training data you give them, which seems to imply something about the nature of intelligence.
They are by their nature illusory. If you're basing your business on illusory information, it just can't be fluid. And all of these efficiencies that people are coming up with, like their AI information is distinctly third class information. Right? Like there's a reason why the failure rate on AI projects is way higher than IT projects. It's like, I mean, the last report I saw was 6 months ago. It was 80%. Usual IT project failure is 40%. Right? Like if you use it to, like when people use it to write newspaper articles, the newspaper dies because everyone knows that you're lying to them. Right? And, I thought the New York Times AI guy said something very interesting, which, I mean, because it's not really a popular narrative, it kind of gets written out. But he's like, anytime that you use AI on its own, it's a parlor trick. If you use it with human beings involved, it can be powerful. But if you don't, it's more. I mean, I honestly think, when you go on Bloomberg and people say AI is the third industrial revolution or whatever, 5 years from now, we're going to be looking back on that and being like, what on earth were you thinking? I mean, it'll be yet another hype system, right? And another thing is there won't be a bubble for this stuff because the tech companies doing it have so much cash that they don't, it doesn't require, there's no discipline in it, right? It's just like how Meta lost $50 billion on VR, which was, again, supposed to be the future that was going to make us all inhuman and which never happened, right? Like, because people don't want it. It's not actually that useful. It's not that useful if people don't want it. And there's a lot about AI that people don't want, right? So I would just say, like, Steve Bannon makes these predictions and so on. There's no end to people making lots of predictions and so on. I prefer to focus on the mechanics of the technology, the actual. Like, I think it's very useful to read the Internet Protocol packets paper and understand what is going into it, because that's much more insightful to me than any kind of, it's going to change reality. No one knows how technology changes reality. Like, no one is that smart. No one has ever been. The people who've been that smart are just lucky. It's just pure survivor bias, right? And so I think I don't know about predicting the future that way. Now, as for the Civil War question, the political people that I've talked to about AI say that it won't actually have that much effect on the information landscape of the United States, because the information landscape of the United States is already so saturated with misinformation and disinformation that effectively you can't really, huh? you literally can't make it any worse. It's like lighting a fire on fire, right? Like it's already so lousy that it's not possible. As for like the civil discord, I mean, when I wrote that book, the date that I was thinking about was 2040, right? For like that was it wasn't 2025 that I thought when I wrote it in 2018 that I thought the wheels are really going to fall
Accumulating
off
climate
this.
crisis.
Accumulating climate. Well, 2040 is the year when white people become a minority in the United States, right? When it becomes a minority majority country, violence happens. That's true all over Africa. That's true all over South America. Those were the models that I was working on. Now, the violence does seem to be accelerating, and the discourse does seem to be getting so hyper toxic that it seems almost unbelievable that it's hard to imagine a recovery or a restoration. And I did not expect the Constitution to fall apart so quickly. I also didn't expect people to destroy their own education network. That just seemed to me, why would how could anyone who loved their country destroy, or even who said they love their country, destroy the basis of its dominance in the world, right? Like I didn't expect America to make itself less powerful so quickly. And so those were the things I'm a bit surprised by, but mostly I think the pattern is still there. It's just accelerating much faster than I thought.
Yeah.
But AI, I don't think AI, like people talk about AI having this big effect on it. I mean, if you're getting political ads in the United States, there's no way they can generate more. Like there's only so many people with so many minutes in the day to be asked for money to give to save democracy or save America. Like there's only so many data points that you can infiltrate.
I guess the further dystopian horizon for that kind of segregation is like the VO2 or 3 that was just released, this kind of automatic image video generation that you can imagine people kind of walking around in completely segregated realities. I'm sure you've read science fiction right, exactly. But they're already there in the sense that we have these segregated information spheres, but you can literally not know about the guy next door.
Although lately I've become very attracted to this idea of, there's an anthropological concept called schizogenesis, which is that it's essentially how anthropologists describe tribes splitting apart when they get too big, how tribes separate from each other. And that's how you get this human variety. And it's often nonsense, right? It's often like the feathers on it's not things that matter. It's like the feather on the head of the god is the wrong color or whatever like that. And they get in these terrible violent cycles that lead to these separations. So I'm not sure what we're seeing is modern and technological, or whether in fact it's something incredibly primitive and something that is the dark core of basic human violence, right? Like it's very hard for me to tell which one is causing the process.
Yeah, no, I'm sympathetic to that last point. I do think it's the dark core of human violence.
Yeah, it might just be we're people, right? It might just be like, this is what happens when people get stupid, and it happened. You always think, oh, it can't happen here, but there's it's not like Germans or anyone else are more vulnerable to this stuff, and therefore they have an evil history. It's like this is how processes in society work, as horrible as it is to face that fact.
Yeah. Apropos Jay's point from a moment ago about Google's new deepfake video generator, I was watching those videos as I was also rehearsing and rereading your hip hop essay, and seems like the point very much applies to that as well, namely that the future of movie making is going to be very much like hip hop. You can probably produce some pretty remarkable movies with that technology if you happen to have been a really good movie maker before, and if you are, very literate about the history of cinema and genres, etc. So it's my sense from watching that is that the kind of point that you make in the article is going to go beyond just writing.
Well, I mean, I think the closest analog to what AI creation is going to be, and it's my limitations as being a writer and having like a writer's nature is actually quite limiting in this, is that it's actually going to be much closer to a film director. I mean, a film director is already a curator. Right, they go and find a cinematographer. They go and they know that their cinematography will be good. They find a story. They find a writer. And they find the money, right? And then they put it together in it, and they put actors and like they have to understand 10 or 12 different aspects of life just to be able to do their job, right?
Yeah.
And I think, and also, to promote and to actually make it meaningful, you need producers, right? And I mean, I think that's probably where I'm going to go. Is I'm probably going to find producers, because I do audio shows and I do other things where I have producers, but they don't really. You need a production team to make AI art. And I think, the camera also, which changed our relationship to time. That's sort of how I think AI will eventually be. And I mean, people are using it to make political information. I'd like to use it to make art. I mean, if we have these dark, violent nature, we should also find some illuminating meaning. Yeah, we should find some good out of this, right? We should make something beautiful out of this, not just, garbage and, violence. But, political misinformation, like people have been manipulating images, like since they had Hitler doing a jig and they fast forwarded and rewinded the image of him walking into Paris. Like you've never been able to trust an image, right? Like certainly not in my lifetime, right? Like, and so I think the idea that it's gonna sow all this doubt and stuff. It's like, well, if you already believed images, there really was no help for you.
19th century ectoplasm photographs.
Exactly. Right. I mean, they were projecting it onto screens and people thought they were ghosts, right? Like it's old stuff.
Yeah, Stephen, I want to be mindful of your time, and I want to make sure that you can get your real, authentic grilled cheese rather than
I gotta go
the microwaved one.
I've been thinking about it since I mentioned it. Yeah, I gotta go
yeah, me too, to be honest. So thank you so much for this. It was wonderful talking to you, and I hope we can do it again. It's really great.
Stay safe in the land of the free and the home of the brave. There.
Yes, the true North, strong and free.
That's right.
Yeah. And say hi to all our colleagues who are moving to the
I know they're filling up my
Toronto.
neighborhood. My neighborhood's like half American expats now. We'll save a bed for you guys. You'll be fine. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks.